When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Wisps on the highway. User: CFP28. Posted January 20th, 1996.
This winter has been brutal. We're 3 weeks into the year and have already gone through what they're calling the blizzard of 96. It got so bad that there's a line in the Muncie Evening Press police blotter about people stealing snowblowers, and that's a first so far as I know. Down in Jackson County, they got so socked in that my Uncle Carl decided to clear some of the roads on his property with a tractor and got killed when it went to gear without him. Poor guy tried to hop on and stop it, but he was too late. The rear wheels got him. He was pronounced dead at the scene. For me, it's been tough, but not as tough as it could have been. My girlfriend Elaine and I broke up just before Thanksgiving, which turned out to be a blessing because I was in my new place by the time the blizzard hit. I shudder to think what it would have been like to be stuck in our old place together. There's a good chance one of us might not have made it out alive. Having my own space made grieving for Carl easier too. Elaine wasn't known for her compassion. I'm renting an old farmhouse out on the country road near Buck Creek. It's a nice place to be, quiet and still, which is something I really need right now. The only downside is that during the storm of the century, that quiet started to feel isolating. But here's hoping I won't have to deal with that again anytime soon. There's only one thing about this house, or to be more specific, the area around it. It's hard for me to believe I'm actually sharing this publicly, but I guess who's ever gonna see it, right? It first happened maybe 2 weeks after I moved in, not that long before the blizzard set in. My buddy Danny and I were coming back from a league game and some beers at the Bolomat. Danny lives a little further out than I do, so we'd started carpooling from my place. Honestly, I'm glad he was there because if it had just been me, I don't know if I would have believed my eyes. Maybe 300 or 400 yards up the road from my house, I slammed on the brakes because I saw what I first thought was an animal crossing the road. It didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen, but I think my brain was doing its best to present what I was seeing in terms I could understand. What was I seeing? Imagine smoky gray figures that would have been 10 feet tall if they'd been standing upright, running across the highway on all fours. Have you ever seen anything like that? I sure as hell hadn't. They move quick too, like deer on fast forward. In all, 4 of them crossed the road while we sat there, completely stunned. After they were gone, Danny and I sat there in total silence for about 10 minutes. When he finally spoke, it was to ask if he could crash on my couch because he didn't want to see that again. Since then, and the time leading up to the blizzard, and then afterward, I've seen these things another 4 times, roughly once a week, always on the county road, but in different places each time. A couple times I've felt like someone was watching me, even when they weren't actually visible, and it's become intense enough I can't leave my curtains open even a little after nightfall. I don't feel threatened at all, but even so, the sensation of being watched is uncomfortable. I finally decided to share this after what happened last night. It was on the way back from league again, but this time Danny had come straight from work, so he'd taken his own car and I was driving alone. It was snowy, but not whiteout conditions, just normal winter weather. About a half mile away from my place, I saw in my headlights a person standing by the side of the highway. They didn't look like the shadow things, smoky or wispy. They looked like a real human being. They were wearing blue jeans, a knit cap, and a thick fleece coat, but even so, I was concerned about them being that far out of town on foot, so I pulled a U-turn and went back to check on them. They were gone. That's right. In a matter of seconds, they were gone, and there were no footprints in the snow to indicate they'd ever been there. I felt a sort of panic start to well up in me, so I booked it straight home and locked the doors. The problem is that the sensation of being watched didn't ease up after I closed the curtains. In fact, all night it felt like I wasn't alone in my house. Sometimes it even felt like a cold wind was blowing on the back of my neck. A cold breath, maybe. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake the sensation that I had company in that big old farmhouse, and because of it, I spent a sleepless night with my bedside lamp on. Sometime around 4 a.m., I must have finally passed out because the next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. Today, I made a point of asking my supervisor, Joe, if I could take off early. I told him it was because I had an appointment at the bank, but really, it was because I didn't want to drive home alone in the dark again. The thing is, I can handle the smoky things. I can even handle disappearing hitchhikers, but what I can't handle is being unable to stop whatever it is from invading my space. Hopefully tonight is better because I really don't want to have to move again.
Subject, The Gray Man. User, Anony8th. Posted, May 8, 1996.
Do you ever watch The City? I mean, really watch The City? It's like a huge watch full of hundreds, even thousands of interlocking systems that keep the entire mechanism running. Loops upon loops upon loops at a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. To most people, it looks like chaos, but if you sit there looking at it long enough, like I have these last few weeks, you recognize that everything moves according to a rhythm, and if something is out of rhythm, you notice. A month and a half ago, I fell down the stairs of my apartment building. It was the dumbest thing in the world and could have happened to anybody, or at the very least, it could have happened to anybody with neighbors who let their animals roam around the building without any kind of supervision. In my case, I did a triple gainer over top of a ginger tomcat and ended up with a spiral comminuted fracture of my right tibia. For the last couple weeks, all I've been able to do is sit in my apartment and do my best Jimmy Stewart impression as I stare out my living room window for large portions of the day. It's reached a point where I know the garbage pickup guys on site and know their shift rotation. I know at least two of my neighbors across the street are having affairs, the tall blonde woman in the far right of the second floor and a heavyset guy who lives in the middle of the third floor. The heavyset guy is punching above his weight because the women who come over are way, way better looking than he is, at least from a distance. I also know which delivery guys belong to which takeout places and how often people order from them. What I don't know is who the hell the guys in the gray coveralls are. At first, I thought they were municipal guys or Con Ed because they had blocked off part of the street with road cones and were clustered around an electrical junction box on Church. I watched them work, and that's when I felt the first tingle of unease. My father was a marine electrician who really thought it was going to become a family business and tried early on to interest me in his trade. It didn't take, obviously, but I learned enough to know that whatever the men in the gray coveralls are doing isn't electrical work, but is close enough to fool anyone who isn't paying attention. And no one was. I watched them work for hours, and not a single cop or nosy passerby so much as looked twice. The next time they came back was a week later. I wheeled over to the window around 9 a.m., and they had already blocked off a portion of the road surrounding a manhole cover with what looked like twin-head floodlights. Why they needed light in the middle of the day is beyond me, but no one else seemed to think twice. The gray men never actually approached the manhole. They just spent the entire day tweaking the lights and writing on clipboards. I don't even know what there is on a floodlight to tweak, but from the way they were fiddling with those things, you'd think they were highly delicate scientific instruments. I nodded off around 3 p.m., and when I woke up, they were gone. The whole thing left me with this deep feeling of unease, but I tried to shake it off. The following day, I'd asked my sister Tina, who was doing my grocery runs, to bring me a pair of cheap Radio Shack binoculars the next time she came by. The request brought me a raised eyebrow, but no further questions, and I was soon the proud owner of an unbranded 10x50 set of glass that works surprisingly well for the price. It might sound crazy, but the next time the men appeared, I think they somehow sensed the binoculars, and that's how they knew I was watching. It was a Thursday morning, and by the time I woke up, they'd already taped off the subway entrance and were doing their whole milling around with clipboards thing, stopping every now and then to confer with one another. One of them wandered close enough to my side of the street for me, with an assist from the binoculars, to get a look at what they were writing. I only saw it for a split second, but it looked, I don't know, it wasn't English, that much I can say for sure, and it wasn't Mandarin or Cantonese, though someone would likely make that assumption if they didn't know better. It looked vaguely Asian, is all I can say, except it wasn't any of the Asian languages I know, and in my work, I'm required to have passing knowledge of Japanese, Tagalog, and a few others. It didn't just look non-English, though. It looked wrong. Have you ever dreamed about meeting a friend or family member who's died and had that momentary feeling of transgression, like something is happening that shouldn't be? That's how that writing looked. Hell, how it felt. And as I was trying to process that feeling, the man holding the clipboard stiffened. A second later, he wheeled and looked right at me. Then, as if they were some kind of hive mind, all the other workers did the same. My insides turned to ice, and I dropped the binoculars, shattering them on the hardwood floor. The men continued to look, and I was suddenly 8 years old again, caught spying on my neighbor, Mrs. Nathan. I pushed my wheelchair away from the window and sat there in the middle of the living room, my heart pounding. I stayed there so long, I lost track of time. All I know for sure is that by the time Tina came to check in on me, the shadows had begun to lengthen. She asked me what happened, but I demurred, trying to play the broken lenses off as a result of clumsy fingers, but I don't think she believed me, especially after I tried to casually ask her if the city crew still had the subway entrance blocked off. She looked at me in that way she does when she thinks I'm trying to mess with her, her head cocked to one side. She always looks like Mom when she does that. Tina said the street had been clear on her way up and that the subway looked normal. I nodded and cleared my throat, then wheeled back over to the window. Sure enough, everyone was gone. But are they coming back? And what do they want?
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.